Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. This is the weekly news wrap-up for Friday, April 18th, 2014. Well, a deal has been reached in the Ukrainian crisis, and it's a deal, and I'll read it here, that says it's supposedly going to, quote, de-escalate and restore security, end quote. This is a deal reached in Geneva, and it's between the U.S., the EU, Russia, and Ukraine. Now, this deal is supposed to, restore, de-escalate and restore security, and it's supposed to get the pro-Russian, militia to give up their weapons and return the control of the buildings in eastern Ukraine. Now, that's not spelled out that they have to do it, and, Russia, maybe they're going to make them do it, maybe they're not. Russia may just say, well, these aren't our citizens. These are Ukrainians, and they're exercising their right to redress the government. And they're not happy with what's going on in Ukraine. After all, the government that was voted in was kicked out in a coup that was in part sponsored by the U.S. Victoria Nuland was, talking about how, the U.S. has spent $5 billion in Ukraine. She was a top-ranking State Department official that was talking about this, that we had, over the years, spent $5 billion. This is something started by the U.S., which a lot of people just want to leave out. We're not even supposed to be helping this government because it's government created by a coup. Our laws say you can't do that. There was a big hubbub about Egypt, whether they want to classify what happened in Egypt with Morsi, the elected president there, being kicked out. Granted, that it was a Muslim Brotherhood and not very friendly to Israel in the United States, but we weren't supposed to help out the Egyptians because it was a coup. So, even the president is skeptical about this deal to, de-escalate tensions. I'm not sure it's going to do anything. It's happy news, happy weekend, happy Easter weekend news. It might de-escalate tensions for a while, temporarily. But even the president said that the U.S. has to be ready to, quote, respond to what continues to be interference by Russians, end quote. The military option is totally off the table, so if we're going to have to respond to continued interference, well, I guess he's talking about sanctions that nobody wants, including the U.S. Our sanctions have been like, hitting them with a wet noodle. The EU doesn't want sanctions. I've told you about all these, business relationships between Russia and the EU, Germany, France, Great Britain. None of these people want any sanctions. The economy over there is terrible. They're formulating bank bail-ins because their banking system is so shaky. They're afraid it'll implode, and when it does, they want to take, depositor money, bondholder money, shareholder money, mainly depositor money, which is incidentally has come into the U.S., and I'll talk to Ellen Brown about that next week. The specter of bail-ins here in the U.S. and massive fraud in things like, LIBOR, rate rigging in hundreds of trillions of dollars globally. That's next week. But, while we're talking about, that we're not going to have a military option, meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is saying, quote, he has, quote, the right to use military force in Ukraine. Hey, for him, the military option is full on. Full on for him, but not us. So why doesn't the president just shut up? The State Department just shut up about, well, we're not going to have a military option. I mean, do you know how weak the U.S. looks over this? This, something that the U.S. started, and people keep telling me that, this is a master plan. They're roping in the Russians. And you listen, it continues to look amateurish and juvenile and poorly thought out to me. That's what it looks like to me. I hope there's a Lex Luthor mastermind behind all this that will be favorable to the U.S., but I don't see it. I don't think the Russians are concerned at all about sanctions. Not at all. I think they and many other countries are working as hard and as fast as they can to stop using the dollar in international trade. Now, most recently, a most recent sign of that is that the BRICS countries, and that's, Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, the BRICS company, they're making great strides in developing their own IMF and World Bank, that kind of thing. Bypass the U.S., bypass the dollar. They don't like the heavy-handed control of the U.S. They don't want to use the dollar, which looks like it's being devalued and debased massively by the Federal Reserve with all this money printing. We're handing out health care to everybody. Our debt ceiling is unlimited. I'm sure the rest of the world loves that. But that's what's going on, is that the rest of the world is shedding use of the dollar. And this is a definite overarching trend. It's picking up speed. It's irreversible. That's for sure. And what is the straw that's going to break the proverbial dollar camel back? According to John Williams, $16 trillion in liquid dollar assets are held outside of the United States. Can you imagine what would happen if, just a portion of that started getting sold off immediately? Well, we don't need these dollars. We're going to trade in SDRs or rupees or euro, or we're going to spend our own, yuan, or we're going to have a deal between us backed by gold, whatever. It won't be the dollar. And when is there going to be this flood of people selling out that could get out of control? And the inflation here, especially for the unprepared, is going to be stunning. I mean stunning. You could have 3, 4, 500% inflation for imported goods. And because, our brilliant leaders gutted our manufacturing and sent it all over the world, could you imagine what that's going to do for imported prices of everything? Yes, drive them to the moon. And according to John Williams, this could happen suddenly. Next up, the intelligence minister of Israel is really not happy about the negotiations, with Iran over curtailing the Iranian nuclear program. Yuval Stenitz says that the U.S. negotiations were a, quote, surrender, end quote, to Iran. Now, nothing big's happening where they're not talking about war. They want to, settle things diplomatically. The Israelis do. I think the Iranians want to settle things diplomatically as well. But the Iranians have said, hey, we're not going to stop enriching uranium. We're not going to stop our nuclear program. They've said that clearly, not going to stop their nuclear program. The Iranians have said this. And, the Israelis are worried about it, and they're worried about them getting enough nuclear material for bombs. And they're worried about Iran being left with the ability to produce enough nuclear material for a bomb in a matter of, months. They aren't happy with it. So, even though a country says they want to settle this diplomatically, hey, listen, this is still a hot-button issue in the Middle East. And both Israel and the U.S. did not take military action off the table here. This is something that bears watching. And this, of course, we just had the first of the 4 blood red moon cycle that starts on Passover. This is very unique. This only happens, the next time the next blood red moon cycle starts on Passover will be 500 years from now. And usually when these things happen, in the last, going back 500 years, usually something bad happens or something happens concerning Israel and the Jewish people when a blood red moon cycle starts. You can look it up online, but just keep that in mind. Whether it's a blood red moon cycle or not, this is a story to watch, because I don't see how this story gets settled with diplomacy. I just don't. It looks to me like they're just inching towards a conclusion that, well, we're not going to be able to settle this with diplomacy. I hope they can. And they have another meeting in May, in the middle of May, to have more negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. Oddly enough, Israel unofficially does have nuclear weapons itself, but of course have never used them in war. Well, President Obama is touting, now 8 million signups to Obamacare. Woohoo! When I heard this, when I saw this, I thought, boy, if this isn't putting lipstick on a pig, I don't know what is. I mean, everything's settled. We got 8 million signups. That's going to do it. I just want to say that I want to point this out. This isn't the Obamacare that was passed. The Obamacare that was passed has been delayed almost 36 times. Different big sections, especially the employer mandate for big and small companies, medium-sized companies, whatever. It's all been changed. This has all been, put off till after, key elections. What's been put off, what you haven't had yet, is that, the employer's taxing you on the amount of money they spend for your health insurance. So let's say they split it with you, and they spend $10,000. And you spend $10,000 on your part of the premiums for your health insurance at work. Well, your employer is going to tax you on the $10,000 they spent. So, and they have to comply with Obamacare. Well, that costs more money. For free abortions and free sex changes and free birth control and free vision, free dental, all that stuff, that's going to cost money. And a lot of employers are just going to drop a lot of people, which I think that's what they secretly want. They want a single-payer system. But you're going to pay more. You're already paying more. They're talking about how healthcare costs have risen at a slower pace. Had nothing to do with Obamacare. It's just got put into force, starting to part of it partially in January of 2014. I mean, the Congressional Budget Office, they're out with saying, it's going to cost less in the future. Please stop. We don't even know what this is. We haven't even seen it fully implemented. I mean, the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, also said that it's going to really cost, the average family $2,100 a year more. Remember, it was supposed to save us, the average family, $2,500 a year? No. And the mainstream media, especially the liberal arm of the mainstream media, which most of it is, they don't want to focus on the people that, don't get their cancer medication, lost their cancer doctor, can't go to their cancer hospital they went to. Their hospital is closing down. They lost their plans. They're paying way more. Their deductibles are higher. Their premiums are higher. Their co-pays are higher. No. What they focus on is, John here couldn't get insurance. And so now John, who had a pre-existing condition, is paying 5 cents a month. Like health insurance grows on trees, and like subsidies for that grows on trees. And what they're not saying is that most people are paying way more. And no matter how many spin job stories about how great this partial roll, not nearly rolled out. The reason why it isn't is because if they did, there wouldn't be hardly a Democrat in office ever. What this is about is trying to save the Senate. And I'm telling you, my prediction is the Republicans, and they've got their problems too, but at least they didn't vote for Obamacare. The Republicans are going to control the Senate after 2016. And then the president is going to be the president of no. And then I wouldn't be surprised if Democrats wouldn't override some of his vetoes. There, I said it. Watch. They'll turn on him and throw him under the bus. Watch. Next up, Senator Reid, the majority leader in the Senate, says that the folks that protested at Cliven Bundy's ranch in Nevada, his home state, they are, quote, domestic terrorists. Yeah, let that sink in. A U.S. senator that says protesters are domestic terrorists. That's very harsh language, especially when you consider that, the government, the BLM, who represents the Bureau of Land Management, set up these First Amendment areas far away from the ranch. Here's a little area. You can say whatever you want here where nobody can hear you. I guess these guys, of course, it didn't work for long. I guess these get totally unconstitutional, illegal. I guess these guys in the government didn't, flunk civics classes, or they skipped them all, where they don't realize that, the First Amendment applies to all of the United States, every square inch of the United States. That's where the freedom of speech lies. Now, Cliven Bundy has lost a couple of court cases. Just to be fair, the government did beat him in court a couple of times. The government says, this land was given to us when we defeated Mexico in the 1840s. Your family's been here since the 1870s. But then we have this Endangered Species Act, which I think is total government overreach. And that's where the story thickens. I mean, these guys came down, you talk about overreaction, SWAT teams, attack dogs, pepper spraying people and hitting them with the tasers and snipers and heavily arming. These guys were ready to go to war over a desert tortoise and grazing rights. You talk about overreach. You talk about heavy-handed, which is what people are upset about. Oh, you have a little law that talks about the endangered species, and therefore you can take this land. Well, there's a lot of complicated things, but the overarching theme, according to one of my guests this week, Fabian Calvo, whose company, the NoteHouse.us, buys and sells $100 million worth of real estate. He's got good connections, and he says, oh, this is about the future collateralization of land in America to pay off this trillions and trillions of dollars of debt. And some of this debt were these toxic mortgage-backed securities the bankers pumped out and sold to people all over the world, like the Chinese. And so the Chinese want something for their money. Now, is Harry Reid involved in a land deal here? No. That, according to the Blaze, no, he's not. Are there going to be land deals with the Chinese to collateralize and securitize U.S. land to pay people off and to try to, pay for the fraud and the crime of bankers? I think so, and so does Fabian Calvo. I mean, you talk about cracking down on, why don't we crack down on all this illegal immigration? Listen, I wouldn't even tell you that they should crack down the way they did on American citizens. I must be humane, bringing, attack dogs and tasers and snipers to the border. But why don't they crack down on that? Hey, I got one for you. Why don't they crack down on criminal bankers that have wrecked the global financial system and robbed Americans of trillions and trillions of dollars, and not a single big banker has gone to jail? J.P. Morgan paid a fine for helping Bernie Madoff in his more than $60 billion fraud. They paid a fine. Just pay a fine. Write a check. Pay a fine. And the list goes on and on. What about cracking down on, HSBC admitting to laundering money for terrorists? How about, a subsidiary of Deloitte helping Standard Chartered, admitting to laundering money for terrorists? What about that? What about cracking down on that? They got to pay a fine. They admitted to it. Oh, here's one just from the last week or so. This is last couple of weeks. This is SAC Capital. You see this right here, SAC Capital? There you go. They accept a deal. And right down here it talks about, about $900 million fine. And the prosecutors are, saying that, hey, this is the biggest penalty ever in a criminal insider trading case. Criminal insider trading, you could just pay a fine. They had them dead to rights. Just pay a fine. Here's another one that just happened this week, and this is, hey, look at Bank of America. $6 billion in legal fees. $6 billion in legal fees for their mortgage-backed securities. The ones I told you about that turned toxic. The ones that they said were AAA, and now the Federal Reserve is still buying them off the bank's books at $25 billion a month, down to $25 billion a month. You're going to crack down and bring snipers, SWAT teams, attack dogs, tasers, and massively armed federal agents to attack a rancher over grazing rights and turtles, and you're going to let these bankers run wild? Hey, FBI, you should be ashamed of yourselves. Thank you for supporting USAWatchdog.com. I did have a small problem with my server this week. Was not attacked, not this time. Did have a small problem with the serving company this week. It was down for a while, but was not attacked. Jim Sinclair, people have asked me about him too. He had a server problem too. He wasn't attacked. I called him on the phone and said, hey, I'm down and you're down too. No, it's just, no, we're fine. So just to pass that along to you. But I got some of the, the nicest, most concerned people on the internet and the smartest people on the internet. Thank you for supporting USA Watchdog with your comments. Thank you for those of you who use the donations button. That's the way I see it. I'm Greg Hunter. Have a nice weekend.